Hi, I'm Alanna Levinson with I Love My Life Coaching, and welcome to the second video in the Demystifying the Science of Success training video series. One thing to know about me is that I'm a brain geek. I love learning about the brain and try to absorb as much as I can about neuroscience, neuropsychology, and how it affects our emotions, our behavior, and most of all, what gets created in our life. You may have heard some buzzwords or key phrases out there in the work world referring to emotional intelligence, leadership development, or change management, where a lot of training programs are designed around these concepts. There are also a lot of coaching and other executive development programs that incorporate content based on these concepts. Sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. One of the reasons they don't work has to do with the fact that there is no momentum. When there's no momentum, good information may be heard, but it doesn't sink in because they haven't put what they learned into practice. And after the high wears off, they go back to their old patterns. When momentum gets created from consistency and continuity and real-time, real-life practice, that's when you, your life, and the level of success you're achieving really starts to shift. If you're a business owner, you're probably familiar with or have heard about the need to invest in a branding or marketing program. These programs can help you get your name out there in a clear and concise way to effectively communicate your mission and your message. But here's the problem. You can spend thousands of dollars on a marketing campaign or a social media program, and regardless of your investment, you still may not achieve success. Why? Well, it comes back to you and your brain. For those of you watching this, you either already have an interest in brain science or you're intrigued by it. My intention with these videos is to help you connect a few more of the success dots for you. So here's what I've learned about the brain and how I apply it to what I do as a success coach. The conscious brain makes up about 17% of total brain mass and controls just 2 to 4% of our actual perceptions and behaviors. The unconscious brain makes up about 83% of total brain mass and controls 96 to 98% of perceptions and behavior. Yes, that much. That may be hard to believe, but when you start to think of the patterns that show up in your life, this is where things start to make sense. 83% is a pretty large chunk of our brain. To learn a little bit more about where I'm going with this, I want you to think of your brain as a mechanism. I know we're a lot more than that as human beings. We're emotional, energetic, spiritual, but for the sake of this conversation, for now, think of it as a mechanism. And as a mechanism, its main purpose is to keep us alive. So it's been programmed or designed to do some very specific things to support us in our survival. When you're using willpower to make a change in your life, you're relying on the conscious part of your brain to maintain control. What scientists have discovered in the last decade or so is that the underlying part of the brain, or the unconscious brain, accounts for over 96% of what we actually do. Your conscious brain exerts creative control, but it's your unconscious brain that's leading the show when it comes to long-term results. For all of you brain and fact junkies, here are some other differences between the conscious and the unconscious brain that you might find interesting. Conscious impulses travel at speeds of 120 to 140 miles per hour, while unconscious impulses travel at more than 100,000 miles per hour. The conscious brain processes about 2,000 bits of information per second, while the unconscious brain processes about 4 billion bits of information per second. And depending on who you talk to, these estimates may differ, but regardless, the distinction is pretty big. The conscious brain is volitional, meaning it's controlled by conscious will. It sets goals and judges the results. The unconscious brain is servile, meaning it doesn't set any goals of its own. It executes the goals it's provided with. It doesn't judge the merits of results, only whether they match the given goals. But the goals provided to the unconscious brain may get doubted, rejected, or may not seem achievable. You see, our unconscious brain looks for pattern recognition. Although it functions mostly like a tape recorder playing back captured data, which it then stores permanently, like in a file cabinet, in a fraction of a second, it's comparing new information with old information and is looking for what's familiar. If it appears familiar, it computes that because you've been through it before and you've survived it before, then most likely you'll survive it again. So that's why we find ourselves in repetitive patterns. If you're about to embark on something new or you're trying to achieve something that you haven't before, that data can't be found in your file cabinet. So that's when our brain will sometimes throw up red flags and cause us to experience fear. It's basically trying to warn you to keep you alive, of course, saying, "This is not in my data bank. I don't see that you've been through this before, so if you do this, I don't know if you'll survive." The conscious brain has a very short-term memory span, only about 20 seconds for most people. The unconscious brain remembers everything it experiences forever. Here's what else is interesting about the brain. The conscious brain perceives past and future, and the unconscious brain has no concept of time. Everything is happening right now as far as it's concerned. It also can't tell the difference between what's imagined or real, so it interprets everything as if it's real. And although the unconscious brain has been programmed to do things for our survival, because the unconscious brain trumps the conscious brain easily when it comes to achieving results, it can work against us. So it's important to understand what the unconscious brain is doing in order to consciously beat it. Make sense? In the example of finances and debt, if your unconscious brain is programmed to believe you have been and therefore will always be in debt, then no matter what actions take place to change that in the short term, your unconscious brain will work 24/7 to bring you back to that reality. So does your willpower work that consistently? Unfortunately not. This is why we've heard the many unfortunate lottery winner stories who end up bankrupt within a few years of winning their jackpot. It's because they unconsciously view themselves as poor. So that's what the unconscious brain makes happen. So if you happen to win the lottery, a suggestion would be to take the annual payments. This would allow time to catch up with the new experience of feeling wealthy. You may blow the first few annual payments, but you'll eventually view yourself as a wealthy person and be much more likely to hold on to that wealth in the latter years. The same goes for slow growth and progress versus fast growth in your career or business. All too often when a company is going through a major growth spurt that happens in a short period of time, if they can't keep up with it and make intentional long-term choices to sustain that success, like what we talked about in video 1, the following scenario happens. Things start to fall through the cracks, people become overwhelmed, then employees and clients start to become unhappy, and before you know it, the company is imploding and business starts to reverse. There is something to be said about slow and steady, although I don't mean stop taking action. If you want to change something significant in your life, whether it be money, your health, or relationships, it's important to learn how to reprogram your unconscious mind by installing new beliefs so that the unconscious mind guides you to your new path, one you consciously want to create. And you can do this by being thoughtful and purposeful about goals and writing them down. You're then outlining for yourself the steps to get there, creating your roadmap to success. Then, when you experience the quick and fast changes, your brain will match it up against that roadmap you already created. Now that I've given you an earful about the differences between the conscious and the unconscious brain, let's talk about something else it does that's important to understand. Our brain needs repetition for a new habit to take hold. So yes, we're habitual beings, which I'm sure you've already noticed. So how can habitual ways get in our way? When I talk to clients about what they're committed to, we spend time on what they value, since our values are what's important to us, and that's what drives us. We can then better guarantee follow-through. I became fascinated about the following fact and had a big aha moment when I learned that although we can create a brand new habit anytime we want, we can't just get rid of an old habit that we don't want anymore. We actually have to replace it with a new one. So to no longer do something that's unproductive, you'll need to replace it with deem as a productive habit. But to make something a habit, which is really a behavior that we practice over and over, it's the rinse and repeat cycle. Rinse and repeat again and again and again. In other words, if you think you can go to the gym once to work out and come out with big bulky muscles, you're not being very realistic. The same goes with working on you, your career, and your business. It's a process and requires progress. I like to term this process as practicing. I coach my clients on a philosophy of notice and practice. And again, notice and practice, practice and notice. When you just notice something, you can look at it without judgment. We tend to be a bit hard on ourselves and sometimes on each other, so it's nice not to make the process of learning right or wrong or good or bad. We can then also look at it with curiosity and see it as something interesting, something to learn from and gain new insight. When you practice something, it's not about getting it right. You're just practicing it over and over until you become more comfortable with it. And over time, it gets easier and easier, and before you know it, it becomes a part of who you are. So when we notice and practice over and over, that supports us in creating productive habits where the experience is one of curiosity, openness, and possibly even having some fun. In the meantime, when you look at your life and your behaviors, or what your normal practice is, what have you mastered? Most people have mastered some sort of unproductive behavior. Here are some examples that I see show up with my clients. Avoidance, procrastination, poor time management, or really how you prioritize your time, because remember, you can't manage time. These become our survival instincts. They may have worked for us at some point, which is why we practiced it over and over, and then they became a habit. So take a look at what your survival instinct is. Question for you: what is your survival instinct having you do, and how is it potentially causing you overwhelm? If you aren't sure what I'm talking about, this is where it can start with I should, I have to, or I need to, and we can turn those around into something more productive. We can change the I should into I can or I will. Turn I have to into I'd love to, and shift I need to into I want to. It could also sound like it would be great for me if I, or I could see the benefit if I. So although you may have mastered an unproductive behavior, what would you like to master instead? Then practice that. The last thing I'm going to feed your brain with about the brain is the fact that it associates information together, and it does this instantaneously. So it links similar ideas together. This is another aspect of how our brain can work against us. Based on past experiences, it makes assumptions on our behalf to protect us and to keep us from embarrassing ourselves again or from failing again. Although when we are conscious and intentional about our thoughts, actions, and behaviors, then we can use this previously programmed aspect of our brain to work for us. At some point, you've probably had a thought like, I tried that and it didn't work. And it was also most likely a great learning experience. And just because it didn't work once or twice, it doesn't mean it won't work if you tried it again. This time with more knowledge and information. I'm sure you've heard the story of Thomas Edison and the invention of the light bulb. It's safe to say that he tried over 1,000 times to get it right. When a reporter asked him about his many failures, Edison simply said, "Well, it just meant that I was that many times closer to success." Talk about a reframe in perspective, shifting the focus from failure to success. Think of an experience you had where you tried something and it didn't work. Now, here are some questions to shift your perception about it. Did I really explore it from every angle? Most likely you'll come up with the answer of no, so then ask yourself, well, what's a different approach I can use? If the situation involves someone else, there's the question of, how can I take responsibility for my participation? This is the basic difference between having a closed versus open mind. The unconscious brain naturally limits us, but it does it for our protection. When you keep an open mind and you ask yourself some open-ended questions, ones that can't be answered with a yes or a no, you may just come up with an answer that will free you from the unproductive behavior or limiting mindset that keeps you stuck. Which brings us to the fact that our brain loves questions. When it hears a question, it wants to answer it, whether it's a question you ask yourself or a question that someone else is asking of you. Are you asking your brain the right questions? I don't mean right versus wrong, right in the sense of, are you asking your brain the most powerful question you can ask it so that you arrive at an innovative answer that gets you thinking differently and to see things differently. Therefore, the answer you come up with kicks you into gear and into action in a way that supports your goals and those things that you want to achieve, ultimately experiencing more success. So in this video, we covered how important consistency and continuity is to create a momentum our brain needs, understanding the differences between the unconscious and the conscious brain, and what the unconscious brain is programmed to do for our protection and survival, although once we become aware of it, we can consciously beat it, how old undesirable habits need to be replaced with new ones and require repetition until that new habit is installed and instilled as a practice. We went over the notice and practice process. We had you look at what you've mastered in your life and how it's potentially causing you overwhelm, as well as what you would rather master instead. I shared about how our brain associates information, old with new, and learns quickly, that when you keep an open mind, it's amazing what's possible. And finally, our brain loves questions, so asking it more effective questions can support us in arriving at more effective answers. I acknowledge you for getting this far and watching these training videos. It's a lot of information, and I'm hoping that you're already experiencing some shifts and having a few light bulbs go off for yourself. Stay tuned for the last video coming up. In the third video, I will identify the specific types of thoughts, beliefs, and attitudes that hold us back from success. I know that when you watch it, you'll discover which one you relate to the most, and there might even be more than one. Those thoughts, beliefs, or attitudes might relate to a specific person in your life that seems to consistently trigger you in some way, or the circumstance you can't seem to get yourself out of, or the situations or conversation you avoid because you're afraid of what might happen. I'll also be giving you some questions you can ask yourself so you can immediately gain clarity and create changes that can impact your life right after doing the exercise. Again, if you have any questions or comments, please share them with us below. I look forward to seeing you for the last video in this Demystifying the Science of Success training series. Until then,